Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I am Rhianne Edwards, a fantasy author, and today I'm going to talk about my top 5 romance tropes, cliches, whatever you want to call them. So let's get into today's video. As you may or may not know from following me, I love romance. I need to have a romance in every story that I read. I just get bored without it, and that is no disrespect to anything else, but for me personally, I just love romance. Before I continue, I sound like this because I have hay fever and it's come on with a vengeance and I hate it and I can't help how I sound, so I'm very, very sorry. So, top 5 romance tropes, cliches, I don't know, I've just lumped everything together. So my top 5 fave romances, okay? So some of these are tropes, some of these are like cliches, some of these are like moments, but here we go. So, number 5, thrown into a situation type thing. So I've actually got 2 examples of these, and they are both young adult series that I read when I was in my teens, and the stories wouldn't have happened without the 2 characters being thrown into this certain situation. So the first one is the Whirling trilogy by Stephen Cole. So they're short books, but I absolutely loved this series. It's about werewolves, if you didn't get that from the title. And basically Tom here, he gets it's not a spoiler, it happens in like the first chapter. So like he gets captured by Kate's family because they want to turn him into a werewolf. So Tom and Kate are thrown into this situation, and they sort of go on the run together, and you know, a few other bits and bobs. But I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give it all away. But without him being captured and the family wanting to turn him into a werewolf for Kate, and those two wanting to run away from this all, they wouldn't have actually met, and therefore they were thrown into this situation, and I absolutely love it. So I don't know if that's like a traditional or an I don't think that's an official trope, but we're going to call it that. And then my second example is one of my all-time favourite series, is the Darkest Power series by Kelly Armstrong. I love this series, definitely YA's perfect YA example. It's about this girl called Chloe Saunders, and she ends up in this home for like troubled children, not as all as it seems. You've got things like necromancers, werewolves, magic, all sorts going on in this series. But for the love interests, they never would have met if they weren't thrown into this house together, and sort of all the sort of ins and outs that happens after that. It's a brilliant story. I'm sure at some point I will do a better job of explaining it, because I think this is probably up there in my top series, and that I think it's books that I come back to read when I need a comfort read, so it has to be one of my favourite series, clearly. Okay, so we're counting down. So number 4 is, and I think you could count this as a taboo one, but it's age gap. Okay, I quite like it. So the example that comes to mind is I recently read some contemporary romance by Kat Mason, and she had this. There was an age gap. I think there was about 12 or so years. I know age gaps can be bigger in age gap stories, but I think the main character was like young, like 18, 19, 20, sort of that sort of young, and then the male main character was like in his 30s, and they'd sort of grown up together, so it was a little bit weird, a little bit taboo, but I kind of dug it. I loved it. I loved the dynamic. It was just unusual, and I know taboo things, we've got different sort of taboo things, haven't you? And I know some people are like, ooh, no, age gap. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So that's what I'm going to say on that. Okay, so my counting down number 3 is soulmate romance. Okay, now you can have insta-love and slow burn within this. But I just love soulmate. I love books where the characters were like made for each other, and almost like predetermined, predestined. I love that. I know some people don't. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but for me, I love knowing that the main characters are like meant to be together. So some of the biggest examples that I can think of is, I just read a recent book by Abby Fox. She's got 2 fantasy romance books out, and they're about soulmates, and they're brilliant. So the first book is about Neva finding her soulmate, and they have these like marks on them, but they don't want to be soulmates because they don't want to be controlled by something predetermined. But then of course then they do, because you know, all soulmates love each other. And then the second book is even better, because like he gets like amnesia and can't remember. It's fantasy, it's brilliant, go read it. And then the next example is Nora Roberts. I have been reading Nora Roberts for like probably 15 years now, and I first got introduced to her sort of fantasy romance series. So I love Nora Roberts, and this isn't the first Nora Roberts series that I read. I think the first Nora Roberts series I read was Key of Light, the Key of Light series trilogy, but this is my favourite trilogy. This is actually the third book. I don't know where the first book is on my shelf right now, but this is the third book, which incidentally has my favourite romance of the 3. So Nora Roberts typically has 6 protagonists, and they pair up into 3 couples, and there's a book for each couple, which means by the time we get to the third book, the couple that are meant to get together in the third book, you've read about them in the first and the second book, so you've got to know them quite well, which is probably why I love these 2 characters so much. But this book is about magic, shapeshifters, vampires, and just it's lovely. And I love her stories because they all talk about like soulmates, these people meant to be together. There's always like a magic involved, and I love that. I love magic fantasy. It's what I mostly read. So if you haven't checked out this series, then please do. It's the Circle trilogy by Nora Roberts. And it's adult, so there is some spice in here, but it's like low-key, I think. Okay, so what are we on? 2 is forbidden romance. I like a forbidden romance if it's done really well. So I have actually got a couple of examples. So my first example is, I'm currently reading the From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer Armentrout. I think that's how you say her name. I've just been shortening it down to JLA. And the first book in that series was a little bit forbidden romancy, where the 2 characters really like each other, but they can't get together because of whatever reason. And I like that. I think it brings a lot of tension. It means that I'm not so keen on insta love, which means this is a lot more slow burn. And so you get to really get to know the characters and how they work together. So you're really invested. So when they finally do get together, it's like this big moment. And the other example I can think of is the Bridgerton series. These are written by Julia Quinn, and I'll admit I have not read these books because historical, like Regency, that sort of thing, isn't normally my scene, but I absolutely adore the series on Netflix. And the second series was with Anthony, and that was very much like a forbidden romance. They weren't supposed to be together. Now, I know some people may disagree, but I think it was like forbidden romance. They clearly liked each other, but they could not admit that to each other because they weren't allowed, or they weren't supposed to be together. And there was one moment in particular that, so they were walking past each other and their hands sort of like reached out for the other one, like really subtly, and I'm like, romance. So I had to bring that series into the countdown. Okay, so my favourite ever romance trope, if you haven't guessed it, is enemies to lovers. Like, who doesn't love that angst and that hate and that anger that we all know is fueled by underlying romance? Love it. It's amazing. So one example that I can think of that I really enjoyed reading was the Talon series by, this isn't the first book, but it's just the first book I grabbed on my shelf because my husband sorted out these shelves, so the books are not in order, so don't blame me for that. That's not me, but I haven't sorted it out yet. So I think this is like, what number is this? What number are you? Oh, I think it's the last one. Anyway, it by Julie Kagawa. I really liked the Talon series. It was about dragons and so dragon shifters, but in a contemporary setting. So it wasn't like high fantasy. It was like urban, modern day fantasy with dragons, which I loved. It was awesome. And the two main characters in this are, so you've got your dragon shifter and then you've got a member of the basically dragon killer society, St. George, and those two characters were like enemies to lovers, and it was brilliant, and it had dragons in, so I mean, like, dragons, right? So they are my sort of top favourite tropes. Some of them are cliches, some of them are taboo, some of them are just like situations, like the thrown together situation. I like that. That happens a lot. I like it, okay? So what are your favourite romance tropes, cliches, whatever? Put them down below. I'd love to hear them. I'd also love to see some more examples so that we can all go and check out these amazing romances. But in the meantime, before you go, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe because I'd love to see you again here soon. Okay guys, I will see you next time. Bye.